The Young and the Restless spoilers Tuesday full October 7, 2025. Genoa City was never quiet for long, and this week, the calm that lingered around Chancellor Park shattered with a new round of betrayal, manipulation, and heartbreak. The story began where all great Newman-Abbott rivalries always seem to collide, at the intersection of family loyalty and ambition. Victoria Newman, restless and calculating as ever, found herself pushing deeper into her father's orbit, craving information that Victor refused to share. The question was simple but the implications enormous. What exactly was Citizen Kane, and why did Victor seem so determined to keep the details buried? Her curiosity was more than professional, it was personal. She had built her identity on being Victor's heir, the only Newman child with his same appetite for power. Yet now, as she watched her father scheme behind closed doors, she began to fear that her place in the empire was slipping away. Victor was playing another long game, and Victoria intended to know every rule before she found herself used as one of his pawns. Across town, another storm was gathering. Billy Abbott had spent weeks teetering between determination and self-destruction, his temper a barely controlled fire. Sally Spectra, who had once been drawn to the chaos that followed him, now found herself dreading the inevitable explosion. She knew she had crossed a line that could end everything between them if he ever discovered it. In a moment of misguided desperation, she had borrowed Billy's laptop, pretending it was harmless curiosity, only to contact his mother, Jill Abbott. Sally's intentions were good, or at least that's what she told herself. She wanted to save him, to keep Abbott Communications alive, to protect him from the reckless decisions that had already cost him so much. But the method was unforgivable. She had pretended to be Billy, had written to Jill under his name, and convinced the formidable matriarch to return to Genoa City. When Jill arrived, she expected gratitude. Instead, she found fury. Billy, already on edge from sleepless nights and financial stress, saw his mother's face and instantly felt the old resentment rise like bile. For years, he had fought to prove that he was not the weak link in the Abbott family chain, that he was more than the boy who fell apart every time life demanded something hard from him. Jill's arrival was a reminder that no matter how far he ran, he could never escape her shadow. To him, her presence meant interference. To her, it meant rescue. And as always, their love came dressed as war. Sally stood between them, watching the emotional collision she herself had caused, her guilt twisting into panic as Jill tried to embrace her son and he turned away with cold eyes. Billy's anger didn't come in shouts but in the kind of silence that makes every breath dangerous. He accused her, without words at first, of believing he was incapable of running his own life. Jill tried to explain that she had come because she cared, but that was the wound he could never let heal. Every gesture of love felt like pity. Every offer of help felt like proof of his inadequacy. The mention of Kane Ashby only poured salt into the wound. Jill's complicated history with Kane had always been a raw nerve. To Billy, it symbolized everything wrong between them. She had trusted Kane more, forgiven him faster, believed in him longer. Hearing her name him again, in the same breath as business advice, made Billy feel small, like a boy at the edge of the family table waiting for approval that never came. Sally could barely stand to watch. Every word that passed between mother and son was another thread unraveling. The guilt of her secret burned through her composure. She had thought she was helping, thought that bringing Jill into the picture would stabilize Billy's spiral. Instead, she had set fire to the one fragile bridge that still connected him to family. Now, as Jill defended herself and Billy's eyes hardened, Sally realized she might lose him completely, not because of what Jill did, but because of what she herself had done behind his back. The confrontation reached its inevitable breaking point when Billy discovered the truth. He found the email, traced the message, and saw that the call to Jill hadn't come from him but from Sally using his own computer. That discovery broke something fundamental inside him. For Billy Abbott, trust was never easy, and betrayal, no matter how well-intentioned, always felt like confirmation of his worst fears. He saw in Sally's face not the woman who claimed to love him, but another person who believed he couldn't stand on his own. His fury was immediate, raw, and devastating. He threw himself into the nearest distraction, the only defense mechanism he knew, recklessness. Jill tried to mediate, tried to redirect his anger towards something productive, but Billy refused to listen. He accused her of treating him like a charity project, of enabling his failures by refusing to let him face them alone. Her tears did nothing to soften him. For once, Jill found herself powerless. She had built empires, managed fortunes, and outwitted some of the toughest business minds in Genoa City, but she had never been able to fix her son. Watching him unravel again felt like a cruel repetition of history. She wanted to hold him, to remind him that he was stronger than he thought, but he was already gone, retreating behind the walls of resentment he'd spent a lifetime building. In another part of town, Victor Newman sat in his office at Newman Enterprises, a silent smile playing on his lips as he reviewed the latest reports from his contacts. The Citizen Kane project was unfolding exactly as he intended. It wasn't merely a business maneuver, it was a trap, designed to draw out hidden players and force old rivals into the open. When Victoria entered his office, her composure sharp but her curiosity sharper, Victor knew the conversation would be dangerous. She asked questions with surgical precision, the kind that left little room for lies. He deflected, of course, offering only fragments of the truth. Citizen Kane was, he said, a business opportunity, a means of reclaiming influence in sectors where Newman had been losing ground. But Victoria knew her father too well. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man holding a secret that could shift the balance of power in Genoa City. Victoria wanted transparency, but Victor thrived on mystery. The less she knew, the more control he retained. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that Citizen Kane wasn't just a project, it was a warning. Perhaps it was connected to Kane Ashby himself, whose name was suddenly resurfacing in conversations across town. If Victor was truly using Kane as a pawn, it could mean he was reviving old alliances for purposes that went far beyond corporate rivalry. Victoria's instincts told her there was more at stake than profits. She left her father's office unsatisfied, her mind already forming her own counter-strategy. Back at Abbott Communications, the atmosphere had turned suffocating. Sally spent her days pacing, waiting for Billy to return, knowing every hour widened the distance between them. The guilt that had once been abstract now felt physical, heavy, and relentless. She replayed every decision in her mind, the email, the call, the moment she decided to interfere, and wondered how she could have believed she was doing the right thing. Her entire life had been built on survival, on fighting her way into rooms where she didn't belong. But this time, she had overreached. Billy was not a project to be saved, he was a man drowning in his own shadows, and she had thrown him an anchor instead of a lifeline. Jill, meanwhile, prepared to leave Genoa City again. Her attempts at reconciliation had failed. She had come to rescue her son and instead watched him push her away harder than ever. Yet even as she packed her bags, she couldn't stop worrying about him. She knew that Billy's anger always hid something deeper, fear, self-doubt, and the lingering scars of every mistake he'd ever made. She had seen it before, too many times to count. And she knew what came next, the late nights, the impulsive deals, the self-sabotage. She only hoped that someone would be there to stop him before it was too late. For Sally, the days that followed were a test of loyalty. She wanted to chase after him, to explain that everything she had done was out of love, but deep down she understood that love built on deception was already broken. Billy needed space. Whether he would ever come back was a question she wasn't ready to face. In quieter moments, she thought about the irony of it all, that she, a woman who had spent her whole life fighting for acceptance, had finally found it in a man who could not even accept himself. As the sun set over Genoa City, the parallel storylines began to intertwine. Victor's hidden agenda with Citizen Kane would soon ripple outward, touching the Abbotts whether they wanted it or not. Victoria's hunger for control would push her closer to secrets she wasn't ready to uncover. Billy's collapse would test every fragile connection he had left, and Sally's guilt would drive her into dangerous territory as she searched for a way to repair the damage. In a town built on ambition and betrayal, every act of love came with a price, and every secret was just a prelude to another war. Somewhere, Victor watched from a distance, knowing that chaos was the one currency that always paid off in Genoa City. And as Jill's car left town, as Sally wept in silence, and as Billy stared into the mirror trying to recognize the man he had become, the quiet once again began to fracture. The next chapter was already forming, Victoria plotting her own power move, Sally deciding whether to walk away or fight for forgiveness, and Victor tightening his grip on a plan only he understood. Because in The Young and the Restless, no betrayal ever ends, it merely waits for the right moment to return. There were moments in Genoa City when even the most powerful people forgot that control was an illusion. For Victor Newman, that realization came in waves, fleeting, inconvenient, and always replaced by the conviction that he could still bend the world to his will. But this time, the game was not about business or dominance, it was about family, legacy, and the one person who reminded him of his own younger self, Claire Newman. What began as a test of loyalty had become something darker, and as he watched the fallout from his latest maneuver unfold, Victor began to understand that meddling with matters of the heart carried consequences even he couldn't predict. Claire's romance with Kyle Abbott had been a spark that no one in either family wanted to ignite. It was too delicate, too volatile, the kind of union that carried both promise and danger. For the Abbotts, it represented a merging of two legacies that had fought too many battles to count. For the Newmans, it was an intrusion, an unwanted link between empires built on mistrust. But for Claire, it had been simple, a rare connection born from genuine affection. She had seen something in Kyle that went beyond family politics. Yet Victor had seen it differently. To him, it was a threat, a risk to the Newman image, a distraction for a young woman he believed was still too naive to navigate the manipulative web of Abbott ambition. And so, with his usual subtlety and precision, he had done what he always did, he orchestrated separation. The plan had worked almost too easily. A whisper here, a reminder there, a few conveniently timed opportunities for doubt. Soon enough, the cracks appeared. Kyle, already torn between his obligations to Summer and the emotional scars left by his family's endless power struggles, began to pull away. Claire felt the distance, tried to bridge it, but the invisible hand of Victor's manipulation had already done its damage. When the breakup came, it wasn't explosive, it was quiet, sorrowful, and final. And though Victor pretended to express regret, those closest to him knew the truth, there was a satisfaction behind his eyes, a quiet victory in watching yet another Newman free from what he considered a dangerous entanglement. Victoria saw through it instantly. Her father's performance of remorse didn't fool her, she had learned from the best. She knew how he worked, how every emotional gesture was calculated to hide the satisfaction of control. Yet, oddly enough, she didn't entirely disagree. Part of her felt relieved that Claire was no longer tied to an Abbott. But another part, a deeper, more maternal instinct, bristled at the realization that Victor had once again inserted himself into the emotional lives of his children. Victoria had spent years untangling herself from his grip, yet here he was, extending that same power into the next generation. It was a cycle she swore she would break, even as she felt herself repeating it. Victor claimed he had only wanted what was best for Claire. He told himself that Kyle Abbott was not trustworthy, that the Abbotts had a history of destabilizing the women who loved them. He pointed to Billy's chaos, to Jack's endless guilt, to Ashley's battles with loyalty and pride. But what Victor really feared wasn't Kyle, it was losing influence. Claire was strong, independent, and dangerously close to seeing the Newman empire for what it truly was, a gilded cage. Keeping her emotionally off balance meant keeping her close. That was the Newman way, love as control, protection as possession. Meanwhile, Claire found herself standing at a crossroads. The end of her relationship with Kyle left her hollow in ways she hadn't expected. The whirlwind romance that had begun with laughter and promise now felt like a closed chapter she couldn't reread without pain. Enter Holden Novak. Mysterious, charming, and unshaken by the storms that usually accompanied Newman drama, he represented something new. He wasn't from Genoa City, didn't carry the weight of family legacies or old betrayals. He was an outsider, and that, more than anything, made him intoxicating. When he suggested a trip to Los Angeles, she hesitated for only a moment. Leaving town, even briefly, felt like a way to breathe again. Holden's motives, however, were not as transparent as his smile. He claimed the trip was spontaneous, a chance to escape the constant scrutiny of Newman expectations, but he seemed to know too much about Claire, about Kyle, even about Victor. He asked questions that were too specific, too informed. Claire didn't notice at first, distracted by the freedom of being far from Genoa City. But others did. Victoria, for one, was paying attention. When Victoria learned that Claire had left with Holden, something primal stirred inside her. Part maternal worry, part suspicion, part instinct born of too many betrayals. The timing was too convenient. Victor had just dismantled Claire's relationship with Kyle, and now a new man appeared, leading her out of town. The coincidence was too neat, and Victoria didn't believe in coincidences, not in her family, not in her world. She tried asking Victor what he knew, but his vague reassurances only deepened her doubt. The more he dismissed her concerns, the more she was convinced that he had a hand in this too. Her decision to fly to Los Angeles wasn't impulsive, it was strategic. Victoria told herself she was there for business, attending a conference, but her true purpose was to watch over her daughter. She tracked Claire's movements through quiet inquiries, calling in favors, piecing together fragments of information. The picture that emerged troubled her. Holden Novak had no clear past. His professional background was inconsistent, his connections murky. And though he charmed everyone he met, something about him rang false. In Los Angeles, the city pulsed with light and noise, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of secrecy. Claire and Holden spent their days drifting between galleries, meetings, and quiet rooftop bars. For Claire, it felt liberating. For Holden, it was opportunity. He asked questions about Newman Enterprises, about Victor's latest ventures, about the internal tensions between Victoria and her father. Claire thought little of it, answering casually, not realizing that her words were being carefully stored and analyzed. Victoria's arrival in the city was marked by the same quiet authority she brought to the boardroom. She didn't announce herself or confront anyone immediately. Instead, she observed. She watched from a distance, blending into hotel lobbies, sitting at nearby tables, reading reports while keeping her eyes fixed on her daughter and the man beside her. To anyone else, it might have seemed obsessive. But to Victoria, it was survival. She had spent too long watching men like Holden enter the orbit of powerful women only to exploit them. She refused to let her daughter become another casualty of manipulation, especially if Victor's fingerprints were anywhere on this. The longer she stayed, the more convinced she became that Holden's interest in Claire wasn't purely romantic. She noticed the way he listened when she mentioned Newman projects, the precision of his follow-up questions, the way he guided conversations toward corporate matters. Her suspicions solidified into certainty. Holden was after something. Whether he worked alone or for someone else was still unclear, but Victoria's instincts told her he was not to be trusted. Victor, meanwhile, maintained his usual air of calm omniscience. When Victoria called him from Los Angeles, demanding to know what he had set in motion, his voice was smooth and unbothered. He claimed he didn't even know Holden, that Claire's choices were her own. But beneath his measured tone, Victoria could hear the faintest trace of amusement. It wasn't lost on her that Victor's idea of protection often looked like sabotage. Perhaps he didn't send Holden, but perhaps he didn't need to. The consequences of his earlier interference had already set this new chain of events in motion. For all her intelligence and strength, Victoria still carried the wound of being her father's daughter. Every move she made was shadowed by his influence, and now, as she stalked her daughter through Los Angeles, she saw the reflection of herself in Claire, independent yet tethered, bold yet still searching for approval. Protecting Claire became more than a maternal mission, it became a form of redemption, a way to save her daughter from the cycle she herself could never escape. But what began as protection soon bordered on obsession. When Victoria followed them one evening to a secluded beachside restaurant, she felt the full weight of what she had become, a woman who couldn't trust love unless she controlled it. She watched Claire laugh, watched Holden reach across the table, and felt both pride and fear twist inside her. For a fleeting moment, she saw her daughter happy, radiant, untouched by the darkness of Genoa City. And yet, she couldn't let it be. She needed to know the truth, even if it meant destroying that happiness. The confrontation, when it came, would not be loud. It would be sharp, precise, and devastating, Victoria at her most calculating, Victor at his most smug, and Claire caught between them, realizing too late that love in the Newman family always came with strings attached. The only question left was whether Victoria's bold act to protect her daughter would save Claire, or push her further away forever. Because in the young and the restless, protection and destruction often wear the same face, and no one knows that better than a Newman.